Alright, disclaimer. To start, this is not intended as legal or medical advice. Consult your local laws and seek medical advice from medical professionals before starting a new exercise regimen. So, this will be another recording of some random dude on the internet offering unsolicited advice. Thank you, and you're welcome. I'm Nino of S6 Precision. I have over 26 years of martial arts training experience, mostly as a student, but some as an instructor, and also as a well-meaning study and exercise buddy. Much of that training experience has been good, some bad, and some pretty indifferent. So this is over 26 years worth of mistakes that I am taking out on you. Just kidding. Please learn from my mistakes, my injuries, and also those of my friends. There's a lot of material to cover. This will be a simple list of things that I wish I knew before going to martial arts or self-defense training, and these will be in no particular order. Here are all the topics first before I go into detail. 1. The importance of athleticism. 2. How to punch barehanded. 3. Training with longevity in mind. 4. Knowing the limitations of your teachers. 5. Balancing training and personal harmony. The first thing I wish I knew before starting training was the sheer importance of athleticism. Yes, you can fight and survive in an emergency without any particular training, but man, the increased strength, stamina, and reflexes do help. If your body is the platform on which you mount all of your training drills and exercises, it will never be a detriment to be in better shape. Also, when I refer to athleticism, I'm referring to explosive functional movement, not bodybuilding or sculpting. It may be appealing to aim for being bulked out to get that greater mass, but think about the kind of physical efficiency that you would need to do things such as sprinting, squatting, jumping, crawling, pulling your weight, or pushing your weight. And think about having to deal with the added factor of another person's weight if you had to move, push, or pull them. So any extra mass that's added to your frame that doesn't help with these particular kinds of functions can sap your stamina and your resources. The importance of athleticism can not only benefit you directly, but others around you as well. I remember a specific incident on the subway with a visually impaired senior citizen who's walking down the aisle of a moving train car. The car lurched unexpectedly and the man pitched forward. I was seated in an aisle seat, and I was able to catch him just 1 and 2 feet away from him face planting on the ground. If I was unfit or inattentive, I could have really injured myself, outstretching my hands to help, or worse yet, the man could have just taken a horrible fall. You may ask yourself, but Nino, I really hate sports and exercising is painful. Why should I do this? Yes, it's true. Exercising can be uncomfortable and painful, and in terms of results, you may never end up being a world-class or national level athlete or even a local level athlete. But sometimes a healthy goal for training is not to compare yourself to the accomplishments of other people, but to aim to be the best, most improved version of yourself. Your training should take into account and measure your own growth and accomplishments. If you're getting older, or if you're managing lingering injuries, you can do things such as improving, regaining, or strengthening your ranges of motion, or doing things to maintain or improve cardiovascular health. My grandfather, up until his late 90s, walked around his neighborhood daily with the aid of a walker. His basic daily regimen helped him to get to nearly 99 years of age while staying very sharp mentally. Again, some of that is genetics, but you also just have to work with what you're given. If you have a specific interest in something like fight training, high-intensity interval training may be a good option for you. That's the type of training with repeated rounds of different anaerobic activities. So you end up doing bursts of activity, often with an oxygen deficit. In my limited opinion, this is closer to actual fighting. When I've had to use my training outside of practice, the energy expenditure was closer to something like sprinting rather than jogging. So like these kinds of bursts of activity. I've had the thought after a recent incident that my conditioning workouts were tougher physically than actually having to lay hands on somebody in a defensive situation. Ultimately, for me, it was a good thing. In an emergency situation that you can resolve with energy to spare, that just means more resources. That means more energy that you can use to get home or escape to safety, or more resources to assess yourself for post-incident injuries, or in the case where that first wave of badness is followed by second and thirds, you have more resources to deal with danger. The second thing I wish I knew before I started training was the proper way to punch without gloves. The human body is a really curious thing. It's both more durable and more fragile than you'd ever expect. Modern training and modern combat sports have led to the widespread usage of protective gear, including hand protection. With gloves, people can punch harder and be a little looser with their targeting, since some of the consequences are partially mitigated. But without those gloves, it's pretty easy to break your hands, since it's composed of all these small bones and joints. One of the most common hand injuries is called a boxer's fracture, where the metacarpal behind the pinky knuckle breaks while punching. I know this from first-hand experience, technically left-hand experience. It happened to me when I was training, when I was in my early teens. This even happens not just to amateurs but to professionals. Mike Tyson broke his hand in the late 80s in a street fight, and even a modern-day striking expert from MMA, like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, broke both of his hands in a single match. Why I think this knowledge is important is that it's good to have a method of self-protection that does not involve the use of external tools. And also, waiting 6 weeks for your hands to be usable again really sucks, especially if you work on something like a laptop or type for a living. So there are two main ways that I know to mitigate the risks of hand breakage. One way is to switch up where you strike. The human skull is quite hard and tougher than the small bones of the hands, especially the forehead or the top of the skull. If you generally use hard tools, i.e. a clenched fist, on a comparatively softer target like the torso, you should be okay. The same goes for using a softer tool, like an open hand, on a hard target like a skull. So that would be like a open hand palm strike or a slap. So hard tool on soft target is generally okay, and soft tool on hard target is generally okay. So that's one way. The second method is to mitigate hand injury by changing up how you punch when you target above the shoulders. The major target for punching is the jaw. So either lifting up the jaw or turning the jaw with a punch without breaking your hands or knuckles. To do so successfully without hurting your hands is to land more knuckles on the target instead of less. So having the force of a full body strike dispersed in just one knuckle, such as your pinky knuckle, is what leads to the boxer's fracture. Since the human head is closer to the shape of a dome or a cylinder instead of a flat surface, the angle of your hands when you strike, those really matter when delivering strikes. So this is probably going to get super technical and most people would want to deal with, but let me give you a rough example. So get something cylindrical, like a soda can, a mug, a water bottle, a coffee can, etc., and put it on a table. So clench your hand into a fist and put it thumb side flat on the table near the cylinder. You can see that your knuckles don't line up. At best, one or two knuckles could land on the cylinder. If you rotate your fist so that your knuckles are vertical, so pinky side down on the table and the index finger side up, more knuckles can connect. So the difference is horizontal with your fist turned over versus vertical fist like in a hammer grip. So that's pretty technical, but the point of this is that bare knuckle striking is really technical and hotly debated. So everyone has their reasons for doing certain things or forming their fist a certain way. But for the second most technical part, I can actually recommend two basic sources that you can look at and do your research on. So the first is legendary boxer Jack Dempsey. He has a book that talks about how you form your fist while striking, And the book is called Championship Fighting, Explosive Punching and Aggressive Defense. So this was a hard book to find a couple years ago, but they've reissued it relatively recently. So you can find a copy pretty commonly. And the second resource available is the late Danny Sombrano out of San Jose. He used to teach Muay Thai, and he has an excellent series of bare knuckle videos on how to strike, how to form your fists, how not to break your hands on his YouTube channel called Barefisted. So if you look it up, it's one word, B-A-R-E, fisted, so barefisted. And he can explain striking with ungloved hands much better than I can with an audio file. So the third thing I wish I knew from the get-go was how to train with longevity in mind. You can do really hard training that can make you formidable in a short while, but in the long run, those exercises can ruin your joints or your dexterity. Or if you do very, very irresponsibly harsh force-on-force training, you can permanently damage your brain with repeated concussive impacts over time. When you're young, you feel invincible and you can bounce back from injuries, but as you get older, that recovery time gets longer and longer. And you'll be reminded of this when your joints and scar tissue get stiff with age and painful in cold weather. So before that, please consider your approaches. One thing to consider is that one of the goals of self-defense, self-protection, or tactical training should be health and bodily integrity. If you do training that is detrimental to yourself and your health in the long run, you have to consider if it's something that you really need or something that you should adjust. There's a big difference between what is mentally difficult and what is physically difficult. Sometimes, especially in the beginning, they feel the same, but often they are not. This changes with time and experience. For example, if you get used to physical conditioning on a regular basis, you may feel the need to push further and further than your body is prepared to, or push faster than your capacity to recover. Rest is extremely important. You can be mentally tough, but that doesn't mean you should ignore your body or its need to rest and recover. It's possible to overtrain, especially when you need to rest and recover from your injuries instead. So if you do things where you overtrain and hurt yourself, that prevents you from training and that harms you in the long run. So please don't do that. Nowadays, I try to think of the kind of health and physical capacity that I would need when I advance in age. So you have to balance your growth and your recovery to achieve long-term goals. The fourth thing I wish I knew before I started self-defense training was to be aware of the limitations of my teachers. It's easy to get caught up in something or be convinced by a forceful or charismatic personality, or buy into a compelling narrative with roots more in myth than in fact. We are all people, learning, connecting, and interacting with other people, but as human beings, we are fallible. When you start learning something interesting, new, or compelling, it's easy to build an attachment to your instructor. But as someone who has trained with a number of instructors, I urge you to evaluate and assess your attachments. Just because you have spent a bunch of time with someone doesn't necessarily mean you have a healthy relationship with them. Some instructors are great fighters, or have amazing skill sets, or have a wide breadth of knowledge, or have a clear and understandable training method that produces results. Others do not. Some instructors have a deep commitment to coaching or mentoring, but some are looking to string along students on and on for monthly fees, or they desire to build a cult of personality around themselves. No one, not even experienced or skilled instructors, are completely free of ego and human failings. As a student, do not let your esteem for your teacher blind you to their limitations or the limitations of their material. If you are training with a coach or mentor and cannot see any of their limitations, consider that you may possibly lack some perspective, that you may be too close to the issue to see it clearly. In that case, discussing things with an unaffiliated third party, like a therapist that you can trust, may help. You may have to consider what kind of tradition are you actually learning. Do you indeed have a mentor? Or are you supporting a con artist? Or are you buying into some sort of cult behavior or cult-like leader? Or do you have something in between? It's possible to have a competent and well-intentioned coach, but their past may be that they were the most talented student of someone who is actually a con artist. There's a concept known as a sunk cost fallacy, where people continue an unhealthy commitment or relationship just because they've already invested too many resources, such as time, money, or effort into it. This is where you can't stop participating in a venture because you're so heavily invested, and abandoning it would feel like a waste. Training is no different. Your time is limited, so always assess if what you are learning suits you and your needs. The best teachers, in my opinion, acknowledge their limitations and encourage their students not only to learn their material, but to surpass them and seek out other sources of learning and inspiration. These are the types of teachers that want the best for their students, even if it means those students may move on to greener pastures. The last thing I wish I knew at the start was how to balance my training and personal development. So this is how to balance your training and your personal harmony. One of the things that you should look at is to see how you are naturally wired in terms of personality. Are you a pretty passive or relaxed individual? Are you a more of an aggressive one? Are you generally nervous or stressed? Do you have a quick temper? So when you look at your own tendencies, what traits do you have in mind now for yourself? Are you at one extreme or the other, or are you somewhere in the middle? This is important to know because when martial arts or tactical training is introduced, it can disrupt that balance. So when you train, you're training not only your nerves and your muscles, but you're reinforcing how you solve problems or how you deal with conflicts. A naturally aggressive person, when exposed to a more aggressive training method, only gets that strong suit reinforced. I feel the same is true for a passive person learning a more passive approach. What really shapes the method that you learn is your instructor and also the culture of your training facility. So things such as the type of music that you listen to can affect your rhythm and movement. Are you being taught to perform things with any particular emotional content in mind, like sparring or rolling in BJJ while angry? So when you're programming moves, are you also programming things emotionally? If you have a strong personality trait that you draw from normally, one thing that I might suggest is to try training with that opposite methodology or approach to give you access to the other side that you may have a harder time accessing. For example, if you teach a child that has a temper and aggressive method, it'll be like giving them a hammer, and they'll start to see every one of their problems as a nail to get hammered down. That's no bueno. If you teach them to use patience and judgment instead, it may help them make the correct choice when their temper flares up at school. Another example would be if you're a naturally hesitant, like a type of wait and see kind of a person, if you learn something like a striking art where you have to act directly and explosively when delivering kicks and punches, it may help you access something that you're not used to but may need in the event of an emergency. We are all creatures of habit and conditioning, but I find it helps to choose the training options that help us become more well-rounded individuals in the long run. So, alright, those are my 5 things that I wish I knew when I started martial arts training. So again, it was the importance of athleticism, how to punch barehanded, training with longevity in mind, knowing the limitations of your teachers, and then training while balancing your own personal harmony. So stay safe out there and try not to break your hands while doing anything foolish. Peace.